Why did leaving the European Union cost the UK £100 billion in lost GDP and counting? Is this the country where voters were promised £350 million weekly for healthcare, but got supply chain chaos instead? What if I told you UK GDP per capita is now 12% lower than if Brexit never happened, and 40,000 financial jobs relocated to Frankfurt, Dublin, Paris? And why are British pound and UK stock market permanently underperforming Eurozone despite identical monetary policy before 2016? Stick around, because what you're about to discover about Brexit's economic consequences reveals why nationalist populism based on false promises creates self-inflicted wounds that impoverish entire nations for generations. 1. The false promises. Imagine you're a British voter in June 2016 watching television debates about EU referendum. Pro-Brexit campaign shows red bus with massive slogan, "We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead." The message is simple and powerful. Britain pays enormous sum to Brussels bureaucrats, money that could go to struggling National Health Service. Vote Leave campaign promises taking back control of borders, laws, money. They promise trade deals with entire world freed from EU constraints. They claim leaving EU will boost British economy, not harm it. Economists who warn of negative consequences are dismissed as Project Fear. 52% of voters believe the promises and vote Leave. 48% vote Remain. Britain decides to exit European Union after 43 years of membership. What follows is 7 years of economic underperformance, political chaos, and broken promises that rival any European crisis. In this video, we're exploring why Brexit cost UK economy £100 billion and counting, making it poorest performing major advanced economy, how Leave campaign's $350 million weekly NHS promise was complete fabrication, what happens when 40,000 finance jobs relocate from London to EU cities, why UK trade with EU collapsed 16% while EU trade with rest of world grew, and the permanent damage to UK's international credibility and soft power. If you know someone who still thinks Brexit was a good idea or wondering why UK economy stagnated since 2016, share this video and subscribe. The economic damage is measurable and massive. Multiple studies, including Bank of England Office for Budget Responsibility, London School of Economics, estimate Brexit reduced UK GDP by 4 to 6% compared to remaining in EU. That's approximately £100 billion to £150 billion of annual lost output. UK GDP per capita is now 12% lower than would have been without Brexit. This isn't forecasting future harm. This is measuring actual underperformance since referendum. Subscribe now and drop whether your country considered similar exit and what happened in the comments. The £350 million weekly claim was deliberate lie. UK's gross contribution was indeed roughly £350 million weekly, but net contribution after rebate and EU spending in UK was closer to £190 million. More importantly, economic damage from leaving far exceeds any savings from membership fees. UK now has trade barriers with closest and largest trading partner. The false economy of saving membership fee while losing market access is like cancelling health insurance to save premium, then facing massive medical bills. Trade with EU collapsed. UK goods exports to EU fell 16% between 2016 and 2023. Services exports stagnated. Red tape increased dramatically. British companies now need certificates of origin, customs declarations, regulatory checks to sell to EU. Many small businesses simply stopped exporting because paperwork costs exceed profit margins. British fish exports to EU faced 8-hour delays at borders, causing fish to spoil. The promised frictionless trade became friction-dominated nightmare. Foreign direct investment plummeted. Between 2016 and 2021, FDI into UK fell 57%. International companies that used UK as English-speaking gateway to EU market moved operations to Ireland, Netherlands, France. Nissan threatened to close Sunderland plant. Airbus warned of leaving. Financial services exodus accelerated with approximately 40,000 jobs relocating from London to Frankfurt, Dublin, Paris, Amsterdam. UK went from attracting 10% of global FDI to barely 5%. The City of London lost EU financial passport. Before Brexit, London banks could serve entire EU from UK base. After Brexit, they need subsidiaries in EU to serve European clients. Deutsche Bank moved significant operations to Frankfurt. JP Morgan shifted to Dublin. Goldman Sachs expanded Paris office. London's role as Europe's financial capital diminished permanently. Amsterdam overtook London in share trading volume. So after examining £100 billion in lost GDP, 16% collapse in EU trade, 57% drop in foreign investment, and 40,000 finance jobs gone to EU cities, were Brexit promises kept, or was entire campaign based on lies? 2. The supply chain chaos. Brexit created supply chain nightmare across multiple sectors. UK imports approximately half of food supply. Before Brexit, trucks moved freely from France to UK with minimal checks. After Brexit, border delays increased from minutes to hours or days. Customs declarations required for every shipment. Health certificates needed for animal products. The bureaucracy exploded overnight. The empty supermarket shelves became reality in 2021 and 2022. Fresh produce from Spain rotted in trucks waiting at Dover. Imported meats faced delays at borders. Retailers like Tesco Sainsbury's struggled to keep shelves stocked. Brexit supporters blamed COVID, but identical supply chains in Ireland, Netherlands, France had no such problems. UK's self-imposed barriers created artificial shortages. The labour shortage compounded the crisis. Freedom of movement ended in 2021. EU workers who staffed British farms, food processing, hospitality, healthcare could no longer easily work in UK. Approximately 130,000 EU nationals left UK between 2019 and 2021. British workers didn't fill the gaps because wages remained low and conditions poor. Imagine you're a British farmer in Kent growing strawberries in 2021. For decades, you employed Romanian seasonal workers who picked fruit. They came legally under freedom of movement, worked 3 months, returned home. Now they need visas which are expensive and complicated. Many don't bother. You cannot find British workers willing to pick strawberries for minimum wage. Your fruit rots in fields. You're forced to reduce planting next year. This happened to hundreds of British farms. Agricultural output declined not from drought or disease, but from government policy that eliminated workforce. The hospitality sector crisis was severe. Restaurants, pubs, hotels lost approximately 75,000 EU workers. British workers were reluctant to fill positions offering £12 hourly for long hours and weekend work. Many establishments reduced hours or closed entirely due to staffing shortages. The promised British jobs for British workers didn't materialize because British workers didn't want these particular jobs at these particular wages. The trucking industry faced catastrophic shortage. UK needed approximately 100,000 truck drivers pre-Brexit. Approximately 25,000 were EU nationals who left after Brexit. Domestic training couldn't replace them fast enough. Supermarket chains couldn't deliver goods to stores. Petrol stations ran dry in September 2021 because no drivers to deliver fuel. Government issued emergency temporary visas, but damage was done. The Northern Ireland Protocol created border within UK. Brexit meant UK left EU customs union, but Northern Ireland shares land border with Republic of Ireland, which stayed in EU. Hard border between North and South was politically impossible due to Good Friday Agreement. Solution was keep Northern Ireland partially in EU customs union, creating regulatory border between Northern Ireland and rest of UK. Goods moving from Britain to Northern Ireland now need customs checks. Unionists were furious, arguing this undermined UK sovereignty. The promised taking back control resulted in giving up control over part of UK. The pharmaceutical industry faced regulatory nightmare. Medicines needed separate UK approval process beyond EU authorization. Clinical trials required separate UK leg. Pharmaceutical companies threatened to deprioritize UK market due to small size and regulatory burden. Some medicines approved in EU faced delays in UK. Brexit literally slowed access to life-saving treatments. The pet passport scheme ended. British pet owners traveling to EU now need veterinary health certificates, rabies vaccinations with specific timing, tapeworm treatments. The bureaucracy for taking dog too. France became absurd. Small inconvenience, but symbolic of how Brexit made everything harder, not easier. If Brexit promised frictionless trade and prosperity, but delivered border delays, empty shelves, labor shortages, and regulatory chaos, and if British farmers cannot harvest crops while imported food rots in trucks at Dover, and if taking dog to France now requires mountain of paperwork, was this really taking back control or surrendering it? 3. The political chaos. Brexit consumed British politics for 7 years, creating unprecedented governmental dysfunction. Theresa May became Prime Minister in July 2016, promising, "Brexit means Brexit." She triggered Article 50 in March 2017, starting 2-year countdown to exit. But negotiating withdrawal agreement proved impossible given contradictory demands. The UK wanted to leave EU customs union and single market to control borders and regulations, but also wanted frictionless trade with EU. These goals are mutually exclusive. Access to single market requires accepting freedom of movement and EU regulations. May negotiated a withdrawal agreement, but couldn't get it through Parliament. Her deal was voted down 3 times in early 2019. Political deadlock was total. The Conservative Party fractured. Hard Brexiteers wanted clean break with no deal if necessary. Remainers wanted second referendum. Soft Brexiteers wanted customs union membership. May couldn't satisfy any faction. She resigned in May 2019 after failing to deliver Brexit. Boris Johnson replaced her, promising to get Brexit done. Johnson renegotiated withdrawal agreement mostly by accepting regulatory border in Irish Sea that May rejected. He called snap election in December 2019, winning massive majority on promise to end Brexit uncertainty. Parliament finally approved withdrawal agreement. UK formally left EU on January 31st, 2020, but transition period lasted until December 31st, 2020, allowing time for trade negotiations. The trade negotiations were brutal. UK wanted comprehensive free trade agreement. EU insisted on level playing field provisions to prevent UK undercutting EU regulations. Boris Johnson claimed negotiations were easy, but in reality, they went down to final days of December 2020. Deal was minimal, thin free trade agreement with no services access. Financial services, most. Important UK export got almost nothing. Imagine you're a British business owner watching 7 years of political chaos. You don't know what rules will apply next year. You cannot plan investments. You cannot commit to long-term contracts with EU clients. Uncertainty paralyzes decision-making. You watch competitors in Ireland, Netherlands flourish while you struggle with Brexit limbo. Eventually, you consider relocating to EU. This happened to thousands of businesses. The brain drain accelerated. Highly skilled EU nationals left UK. British citizens moved to Ireland, Netherlands, Germany to maintain EU rights. Approximately 200,000 mostly young educated people emigrated between 2016 and 2023. UK lost doctors, engineers, scientists, teachers. Universities struggled to attract EU students who now paid international fees. Research collaborations with EU institutions became complicated. The Scottish independence issue resurfaced. Scotland voted 62% to remain in EU. Being forced to leave against its will strengthened Scottish National Party. They demanded second independence referendum, arguing Scotland should choose between UK and EU. Constitutional crisis brewed. Brexit didn't unite United Kingdom. It threatened to break it. The generation gap was stark. Younger voters overwhelmingly voted Remain. Older voters overwhelmingly voted Leave. Under 30s voted 75% Remain. Over 65s voted 65% Leave. Young people who must live with consequences for decades were outvoted by elderly who might not survive to see full impact. The generational resentment is permanent. The referendum itself was arguably illegitimate. 52 to 48% split on question of enormous constitutional significance. No supermajority required, no meaningful threshold. Campaign full of lies and illegal spending, Russian interference documented, yet results stood and plunged nation into crisis. Democratic disaster masquerading as democratic triumph. The economic forecasts were dismissed as Project Fear, but proved accurate. Bank of England, Treasury, IMF, virtually every credible economist warned Brexit would harm economy. Leave campaign dismissed them as establishment bias. 7 years later, predictions came true. GDP underperformed, trade collapsed, investment fell, sterling weakened. Experts were right. Liars won anyway. If Brexit required 7 years of political chaos, 3 prime ministers, and parliamentary deadlock just to negotiate worse relationship with EU than existed before, and if Scotland threatens independence while Northern Ireland protocol creates border within UK, and if young generation was outvoted by elderly on question determining young people's futures, was Brexit expression of democracy or its failure? 4. The permanent damage. Brexit's economic harm is structural, not temporary. UK, permanently smaller economy, permanently worse trading position, permanently reduced international influence. This isn't recoverable through better trade deals or smarter policy. The damage is baked in. Trade gravity is economic law. Countries trade most with closest neighbors. UK's trade with EU will never return to pre-Brexit levels because barriers exist where none existed before. British services exports, 60% of exports, lost automatic EU market access. Cannot be replaced by Australia or Canada deals no matter how comprehensive. Distance matters. Barriers matter. UK economy permanently smaller. The aging crisis accelerated by Brexit. UK birth rate is 1.6 below replacement. Immigration was keeping working age population stable. Brexit reduced immigration, especially of young EU workers. Now UK faces same demographic crisis as Italy, Japan, with fewer workers supporting more. Retirees. Pension and healthcare costs will explode. Brexit eliminated solution to demographic problem. Innovation ecosystem damaged. UK universities relied on EU research funding and collaboration. Horizon Europe research program participation became complicated. EU scientists less likely to work in UK. British scientists less able to access EU research networks. Scientific output will decline. Technology sector will suffer. Knowledge economy needs international collaboration. Brexit impeded. The regulatory divergence trap emerged. UK claimed Brexit benefit was freedom to set own regulations. But reality is UK must align with EU regulations if wants to trade with EU, or align with US regulations if wants trade deal with US. Small country cannot force large markets to accept its standards. Regulatory sovereignty is illusion. UK ends up rule taker, not rule maker. Sterling permanently weakened. Pound traded around 1.40 to dollar before referendum, fell to 1.20 after vote. Briefly touched 1.03. Now stabilized around 1.25 but never recovered pre-Brexit levels. 15% devaluation means Britons are 15% poorer when buying anything internationally. Foreign holidays more expensive. Imported goods more expensive. Real wage decline masked by currency weakness. UK international reputation damaged. Britain was seen as pragmatic, reliable, rule of law nation. Brexit revealed willingness to break international agreements, ignore economic logic, embrace nationalist delusions. Northern Ireland protocol negotiations saw UK threaten to unilaterally break treaty obligations. Foreign governments watch this. Trust eroded. UK's soft power, once enormous, diminished significantly. No longer seen as sensible center of global finance and diplomacy, but as unstable declining power. The scenarios ahead are grim. Scenario 1, permanent decline. UK slowly diverges from EU economically and politically. Growth. Stays below EU average. Living standards stagnate. Scotland leaves Union. Northern Ireland potentially reunifies with Ireland. England becomes mid-tier power diminished from former glory. Scenario 2, Switzerland-style relationship. UK negotiates dozens of bilateral agreements with EU, gradually aligning regulations without formal membership. Ends up following most EU rules while having no say in making them. Soft Brexit that satisfies nobody but avoids worst outcomes. Scenario 3, eventual rejoin. After a decade or more of underperformance, UK applies to rejoin EU, but must accept Euro, Schengen, all obligations with none of previous opt-outs. Humiliating climb down, but economically necessary. Takes 20 years minimum. Bottom line, Brexit's £100 billion in lost GDP, 16% EU trade collapse, 40,000 finance jobs relocated, and permanent reduction in UK's economic potential and global influence didn't happen by accident. They happened because Leave, campaign built on demonstrable lies like 350 million NHS promise, fooled 52% of voters into self-destructive choice. Because older generation, who won't live to see full consequences, outvoted young generation who will. Because political system allowed bare majority on poorly informed referendum to drive constitutional revolution. And because nationalist populism prioritizing false sovereignty over actual prosperity appealed to emotion over reason. For individuals, the choice is stark: accept declining living standards in rain-soaked island that rejected European partners, or emigrate to EU, maintaining freedom of movement and economic opportunity. 200,000 mostly young Britons already chose the latter. Click the playlist in the card above to continue the journey. Next up, Turkey's 80% inflation proving populist leaders destroy currencies, followed by Argentina's perpetual default cycle, showing some nations never learn. That story continues now.